We Called It Mr. Pinky is the fifth episode of the third season of 2.5 Men. This is directed by Gary Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. I'll go through things chronologically and share some thoughts. And it starts off with a woman leaving Charlie's house. This is a woman called Colleen, and she's played by Natalie Zea. And as she's leaving, she says, "I love you," to Charlie. And I actually got a little bit annoyed by this because Charlie didn't say "I love you" back, and Colleen got really annoyed at him and she called him a smug, cold-hearted son of a bee. But that's really irritating because just because she's there emotionally, it doesn't mean Charlie has to be. I think it's completely unrealistic for two people to both fall in love with each other at the exact same moment. So I didn't particularly like this character from the very beginning. We then have a scene with Jake, and he's telling Charlie about how he got a cupcake from a girl at school called Robin. And Charlie then uses this cupcake to basically tell Jake that he can enjoy the cupcake without becoming emotionally involved. And he goes on this long-winded metaphor, and I was so sure Jake had no idea what he was actually talking about. And then Alan comes into the room and he asks Jake, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" And Jake says, "Sex." And it's rather amusing because I just genuinely didn't think that he would be understanding what Charlie was saying. Unfortunately, what Charlie was saying wasn't the best advice, so it's probably not great that Jake did understand. And Alan actually tells Charlie to not give his son advice on sex and dating, and he calls Charlie a misogynist. And a little later on, Jake then needs to call Robin, and he's decided to like her because he gets a cupcake every day, which definitely doesn't seem like the smartest decision. And Charlie then leaves the room and he goes outside, and after a brief game of Marco Polo, there's a pretty eye-opening discussion between Charlie and Rose. And Rose reveals some things to Charlie that are quite interesting because he's hurting by the fact that Alan called him a misogynist, and I think Charlie is kind of wondering if it's true. And Rose kind of makes it worse for Charlie by suggesting he has Oedipal issues. And those thoughts stay with Charlie because he's then in bed with Colleen, the woman from the beginning. And the next thing we know, Colleen is leaving because Charlie has performance issues because he can't get what Rose said about his mother out of his head. And Alan has just the best grin ever because he is delighting in Charlie's current downfall. So Charlie decides the best thing to do is to go and see Evelyn, confront Evelyn about this, and he does, and she's doing yoga, and Charlie cannot look at her, and unfortunately, he turns his back, and there's a mirror on the wall, so he can still see her. And actually, Charlie pointed out some really valid, really insightful things that have made him the way he is, because of Evelyn's relationships, the way she handled relationships. We actually have some really valid points that could potentially explain why Charlie behaves with women the way he does. And I thought it was really fascinating and very well written, and definitely a well executed scene. And then we have Evelyn wearing one of Charlie's classic shirts, which was rather delightful. We then have another scene at the dinner table, and Jake doesn't want to have any brownies because Robin dumped him, and brownies remind him of cupcakes. Charlie then goes back outside, and Rose has a whole bunch of rhymes to help him try and realise why he is unable to perform at the moment. And this is obviously because of his thoughts taking control of all of his energy and all of his focus. And it was, again, pretty fascinating. And I think Rose had a lot of really great, insightful things to share. And Charlie said, "What do? I have to solve this." And Rose said that the quickest way would be hypnotherapy. And she could help, but Charlie would have to trust her completely. And it was actually a really sweet moment where Charlie pointed out that of all of the women he knows, she's the one he trusts the most, which I thought was rather sweet. And we see the beginning of the hypnosis with Rose telling Charlie to relax. And then we cut immediately to the scene where he's in bed again with Colleen. And things seem to be going really well. And then the phone rings and he begins to buck like a chicken. And obviously this is Rose's doing. We then have the final scene where Jake has decided to bake his own cupcakes. I will say they look delicious. They look wonderful. And he's realised that he doesn't need to have a girlfriend to bake a cupcake or to have cupcakes. He can do it himself. And there are some good messages in there to an extent. And then the timer of the oven goes off and Charlie bucks again. And it's quite a delightful, light-hearted way to end the episode. Even though there are a lot of light-hearted, very funny moments, I think it could actually be really insightful for anybody who is perhaps relating to Charlie. Or indeed if you have grown up with a parent who behaved like Evelyn. I think there are some really, really strong takeaways. Obviously, everything should be taken with a pinch of salt and everybody's situations are different. But I think, mostly thanks to Rose, this episode has a lot of value to offer as well as being entertaining. So that can only be a good thing. But of course, we have a lot of comedy in there as well. And a very, very well-written episode. Absolutely, we called it Mr. Pinky. Is a pretty brilliant episode of 2.5 Men.